welcome to this video which is on the Bickman study that looked at the social power of uniform within the social influence GCSE topic. So first of all, let's start with the description, and there are different parts out there to this study, so you need to know study 1, 2, 3A and 3B. So we'll start with 1. So experiment 1, the aim was to investigate the effects of uniform on obedience. The method was a field experiment, so we had directly manipulated IV, so the uniforms, and you can see in a small little picture there what those uniforms were, and it was tested in a natural, everyday environment on the streets of New York. It was independent measures, so people were given just one of the uniforms and one of the requests. Participants, it was 153 adult pedestrians from the streets of Brooklyn, New York, so it's opportunity sampling, they just used people that were on the streets and available to take part. Procedure, so a white male experimenter dressed as either a guard, a milkman or a civilian went up to people in the streets and asked them one of 3 requests, either to pick up litter, to give someone a coin for the parking meter, or to stand on the other side of a bus stop pole. They were told to act in the same way, regardless of their uniforms, try and have the same tone of voice, etc. And they did the study on weekday afternoons. Results, kind of as you would expect, so 89% obeyed the guard, 57% obeyed the milkman, and 33% obeyed the civilian. So we can see that people were much more obedient to the guard. Conclusion, so we're more likely to obey someone in uniform in general, and then the higher status of that uniform has more power, so therefore obedience is more likely. So that guard was the most likely to be obeyed. Second experiment, so again an experiment, again it was a field experiment, so it used 48 participants this time, and the procedure was the same as 1, but they only used the coin for the parking meter request, and they got rid of the milkman, so they just used the guard and the civilian. They also added in the idea of surveillance. So in the surveillance condition, the experimenter gave the request and then stayed near the parking meter to basically to watch and see if they obey or not, versus non-surveillance. And that's where the experimenter gave the request, please give this fellow a coin for the parking meter, and then walked away. So results, again, so we've got that consistency there, that reliability between this study and the first. So the guard was obeyed more than the civilian. The second finding is that there was no effect of the surveillance versus non, so it didn't matter if this order was given and the person walked away, or if it's given and they watched. That had no effect. Next 2 studies I've done together, so these 2 were both questionnaires, and here they wanted to self-report to see if the guard was perceived as more legitimate than the civilian. Method, like I said, a questionnaire. For the first one, we had 141 college students this time, and they were given questions on 29 scenarios, including the 3 from experiment 1, and asked if the request seemed acceptable, seemed legitimate, seemed like okay things to ask from a civilian, from a milkman, or from a guard. Results. The answers showed that participants didn't perceive the guard or his requests as more legitimate or acceptable than the other uniforms. So they didn't. They said, oh, no, it's no more acceptable or legitimate for a guard to ask me this than it is for the other uniforms or a civilian to ask me this. Stage 3B, so again, it was a questionnaire, like I said, with students. This time they were asked to predict what they think others would do and what they think they themselves would do in response to the requests from a guard versus a civilian. So, you know, what would you do if a guard came up and asked you to pick up litter, and then what would you do if a civilian did? Results from this study showed people didn't think that they would obey the guard more than the civilian. And what can we conclude from these studies? Well, basically, we can conclude from these 3A and 3B, people are not good at predicting how they will act in a social situation. So both of these studies, people are saying, no, I don't think the guard would be more legitimate. No, I don't think I would obey him more. Actually, when we did the study, people were much more obedient to the guard. Okay, so we're not very good at predicting what we will do in the social situation. Okay, on to evaluation. Now, I've got quite a few here. You might want to pause this video here and just test your evaluative skills. Obviously, if you can't from the go, you can listen. And yeah, I've got lots. So strengths, and I've obviously added the context in with each of these as well, which you must make sure you do in the exam. So it's a field experiment, so it's high in ecological validity, meaning it's true to real life. So by using people who are natural on the streets, this should mean that people act in their normal, their natural way when approached with the request from the guard or the milkman or the civilian. So people are going to act normally, aren't they? They're going to either obey how they normally would or disobey how they normally would. It's also a reliable study as the experimenters standardised the procedure. So they had all males were white, they were all the same build, they were all asked to act in the same way in each condition, they wore the same uniform, they asked the same requests. This means it can be replicated. You could also reference 3A and 3B here. They were obviously reliable as standardised questions were used in the questionnaire, so the same questions for everyone. Ethics, you could argue, were good. We'll contradict this in a second, but there was obviously protection of participant, wasn't there, as the requests weren't particularly stressful. Some of them were a bit random, but they weren't very stressful, for example, to pick up litter, so they shouldn't have been anxious or worried about this. So weaknesses. Obviously, field experiments are also bad because they lack control over extraneous variables, making us less sure of cause and effect. So, for example, perhaps all of the people with a civilian approach, they just happen to be in a rush or with other people who distracted them from helping. So these are the things that we can't control if it's a field experiment. Another weakness could be seen as unethical, couldn't it? We've not got any consent, as the passers-by would just ask the request and their obedience was recorded without them even knowing that they were in study, so no consent at all. It was also gender bias, not the sample, so the sample was males and females, but the experimenters were. They were all male. So we can't generalise to how women wearing a uniform might be obeyed or not obeyed. We don't know from the study. It's also ethnocentric, so a lower population validity as all participants are from New York. So potentially, again, we can't generalise results regarding higher obedience to uniform to other countries and cultures. Maybe different countries and cultures don't view uniform in this same way. It's also opportunity sampling, so you just use people that are there and available, and that can lead to a biased sample, as perhaps Confederates were only approachable, nice, kind-looking people, meaning obedience may be higher than is typical. So we don't get a generalisable sample necessarily, or a fair sample there, do we necessarily? And then through 3A and 3B, they only used a student sample, which is obviously age bias. It might not be representative, so perhaps older people are better at predicting their social behaviours than a college student, essentially. Okay, now if we have a look at some, I've made the answer come up there. Anyway, that can be a little freebie there. So this was an easy one anyway, hopefully. So identify the type of experiment used for Bickman's first experiment. So was it A, a field, B, a laboratory, C, a natural, or D, a quasi? So it was A, wasn't it, a field? Next one. So identify one of the independent variables in experiment 1 of Bickman's study. So was it A, the age of the experimenter given orders, B, the dress of the experimenter given orders, C, the location of the experimenter given orders, or D, the sex of the experimenter given orders. So there, hopefully we're happy to go for B. It was the dress, it was the uniform, wasn't it? Next, identify the situation which had the lowest rates of obedience in experiment 1. Was it A, give a dime to a stranger? Was it B, moving to the other side of the bus stop pole? Was it C, picking up litter? Or was there no difference in obedience rates? Guess this is a harder one. Maybe think which request is a bit more random, potentially. So you're not going to do it. So it was B, moving to the other side of that bus stop pole was the ones that had the lowest rates of obedience. Next, identify where Bickman's first study was carried out. Was it A, Chicago, B, Houston, C, New Orleans, or D, New York? So the answer there is D, New York. Identify the sampling method used by Bickman. So A, opportunity, B, random, C, stratified, or D, volunteer. Okay, so there your answer is A, opportunity sampling was used. And then last, identify the correct uniforms worn by the experimenters. So is it A, a civilian, a milkman, and a policeman? B, civilian, bus driver and guard, C, civilian, milkman and guard, or D, civilian, bus driver and policeman. Okay. Hopefully C, you would have gone for there. And then one just slightly longer question. So we've got evaluate the way that Bickman carried out his research into obedience. So just make note, won't you, it says evaluate. So that means we don't have to describe the study at all. We can go straight into a strength of or a weakness of the research is. I won't go through the entire answer again because we had a whole slide, didn't we? But in terms of technique, you can either use 6 separate points made briefly. So my points weren't brief, they were more elaborated, weren't they? So you can do 6 very brief. I think it's better because you want to practice making sure that you can get 2 per evaluation point, so 2 marks, because some questions say give 1 evaluation point and you're expected to get 2 marks for that, aren't you? So I would rather you practice doing 3 points, so 2 good, 1 bad, 2 bad, 1 good, anything, in context. And you can go back to the previous slide, the evaluation slide, to see what that would look like. Okay, right guys, thank you for listening. Once again, any questions, please ask your teacher, and thanks for listening. Bye bye.